Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Kojo. So today we're going to be talking about the differences between a text editor, a source code editor, and an IDE. And part of the reason we're talking about it here is because throughout the iOS and Android courses, we're going to be using the term IDE a lot, and so we just want everyone to know exactly what we're talking about. So the most basic is a text editor. It's really just any program that can save as plain text. We can actually use that to compile code and build programs from. So this includes things like Notepad and TextEdit. As long as you're saving as plain text, you can use TextEdit. It can be compiled, but it's definitely much harder to read. However, this doesn't include programs that will save styles or images. So we cannot use Word. We can't use anything that will save as a PDF. No OpenOffice or anything like that. So it just has to be plain text. But as I mentioned before, it can definitely be hard to read. So over here we have a really simple Kotlin program. If you're building small programs like this, maybe it's not bad to use the text editor. Here we just have one function. All we're really doing is printing out to the screen. Behind that is a single file for a much larger project. So a couple years ago, I wrote a game engine for another project I was working on, and this is just one single file from that. There's a lot going on here. This is in C++. Don't worry about the language. There's a lot going on here, and when the files start getting this long, and when the projects start getting as big as this project was, using a text editor just really becomes difficult. The text editor doesn't really understand anything about C++, doesn't understand anything about the project as a whole either. It doesn't know what a function is or when things are variables. So we can use this, but in the end, it's really not a good idea. Again, everything really just starts to blur together. It's all just white text. So we can use that, but we don't really want to. The nice thing is there are some great programs that are designed to make programming easier. So a source code editor really is just a text editor, but they understand more about a specific language or lots of languages. So you'll get things like syntax highlighting. Because they know a little bit more about the language or the project itself, they can offer code completion, meaning I might start to type a variable name, and based on the surrounding code, it will auto-suggest some stuff. So we'll see that later. Depending on the type of thing that you're building, you might get project support, so kind of like project structure, views, project search, things like that. And we'll get terminal support. So right within the source code editor, we can actually run terminal commands, command line commands. It's really powerful. Additionally, these days, source code editors are getting so powerful because we can extend them. We can add different plugins for really lots of different things, but specifically we can add things like for testing and debugging. So it can really be really powerful. The one that we're going to look at today is VS Code, but Sublime is another really popular one. Atom is pretty popular as well. And if you want to stay away from something with a GUI, you can use Vim. That's also really powerful. You don't have to touch the mouse that much. You're within the command line environment the entire time. And so we're gonna look at a couple of these. So this is VS Code with those two files that I was showing you before. So let's go here. Not this file yet. So this is that object manager, that C++ file that I was showing you before. So you can see it looks a whole lot different in a source code editor. This editor understands C++ comments. So it understands these comments. It understands class types. And so it knows the difference between a class and a variable, and so and function calls, for example. So you can see all of these different colors, and the colors themselves don't mean anything other than they are distinguishing themselves from the different pieces. So when I say they don't mean anything, it's because you can add different themes to your code editor or IDE. So don't focus so much on the colors. Just because you see purple somewhere else doesn't mean that it means the same thing as what I'm looking at. But you can see here, so it understands void is a keyword. It understands, so it looks like in this case, red is a bunch of my variables, blue are my function calls. So a bunch of different things like that. It's definitely more helpful. If I start to type, I should get some basic code completion. So as I type S underscore, you see it's prompting me. Did you mean S underscore commands, component factory, objects, object start, things like that. It doesn't know everything, but it's still, in general, it is pretty powerful. So now if I type in S commands, I type dot, you can see it doesn't actually understand the options that I can do with this. That's partly because this is one single file and not part of a larger project. Over on the side, you can see a mini map. This is actually built into Visual Studio Code. Lots of IDEs have it, either as a plugin or the fact that it's built in. Can kind of give you a larger overview of your file. That's exactly what it is. So if you've been programming in the same files for a while, you might have a kind of a rough idea of different sections of a file, so you can more easily jump to a specific section. These are all pretty small functions, so it all looks the same from at least from what I'm seeing. In the back here, I have a Laravel project. So this is I was playing around with building websites and back-end related things. So if I click over on the Explorer view, you can see actually that I can view all of the files related to this project. So right now there's a bunch of different things expanded, but I can easily browse the entire folder hierarchy. I can find files based on this. I get more like project-wide search. So if I'm looking for, I don't know what I have in here, user, it's going to kind of search everywhere where user is all within this project. There's a whole bunch of situations because user is really common on a website. I can get, again, project-wide search for if I know the specific file that I'm looking for, like my login controller, for example, I can jump straight to it. Or let's see. Well, I already have user open, but what did we see there before? Server.php. I don't know what that is, but yeah. So I can jump directly to files, so I don't even need to deal with the Explorer if I don't want to. Additionally, let's say in my login controller, no, let's go to a better one. The register controller as an example. So still I get that the code completion. So as I type data, it knows what that is to a certain extent. It doesn't know everything, as you can see. Oh yeah, so that's kind of what I was waiting for. So it doesn't know what I can do with an array because it doesn't fully understand everything about the language. It's kind of code editor is kind of just guessing based on what's already typed and maybe some basics that it knows about the language. As you can see, kind of as I highlight over this, there's like a little red squiggly line here. It's telling me more about what that error is. So that the red squiggly line is telling me, hey, it looks like you're having some problems there. So it's saying based on PHP, I'm expecting an expression, I'm expecting a semicolon. And then additionally, it's telling me who made that change. So it says me from just a few seconds ago. And it's kind of telling me things related to my source control, which we'll talk about in a later episode. If I highlight over a different line, it should, so it says I added this on my first commit 4 months ago, something like that. Down at the bottom, I have a terminal built in. And so source code editor probably isn't going to let me compile. But if I'm making web pages, or if I'm making like a web-based project like Laravel or Angular or things like that, I'm not compiling anyway, but I'm using some additional tools on the command line to maybe serve my web page locally, things like that. One of the cool things about this, though, is if I'm working on, if I have those additional tools, I don't have to leave the editor to do anything. So if I want to, like, let's say, add a new controller, I have PHP artisan make controller, and then I could create whatever, my new controller. Okay, so I haven't actually left the IDE. I've created my new controller. Now, I didn't add anything there, so it didn't do anything really special, but it did create that file. And then, additional information, because it's my terminal, I have information about which branch I'm on source control, so things like that. But again, we'll talk more about source control in a different episode. Okay, so that's kind of showing like some project-wide searches. More powerful than even a source control editor is an IDE, and this just stands for Integrated Development Environment. So these tools try to be everything that you would need for building your project. So it's already everything that a source control editor is, plus more. So there's going to be more help with source control. It's going to be more support for projects, so things like refactoring and analyzing for errors. A lot of times you'll get built-in compiling, debugging, and testing. Because you get built-in things like debugging, you can actually view variables at runtime. You can view memory or registers at runtime. Sometimes you'll get tools for checking performance, so you'll get like a profiler. And for mobile projects, you can get simulators, meaning you can simulate an iOS on your desktop, so you don't actually need to plug in and install on a physical device. So if you're building Android projects, you're going to be using Android Studio. If you're building iOS projects, if you're building iOS projects, you're going to be using Xcode. If you're building if you're building something in the .NET environment, or if you're building games on Windows, you'll be using Visual Studio, things like that. PHP Storm is a really powerful IDE if you're building PHP projects or like Laravel projects. Really, really powerful. So let's take a look at some of those. So this is an example of Android Studio. Still over on the side, I have my project structure. This is one of the cool things about building on mobile projects is we kind of get some visual tools to help us visualize what our layout is going to be. And so I'm not doing anything really fancy right here. This is just a really basic startup project for Android Studio, but you can see I have something called the text view with the text hello world, and it will show on the screen as I'm typing it. So I get a rough idea of what my layout is going to look like. There's a bunch of tools up at the top, and we're going to take a look at those. That is Xcode. So let's really quick, we're going to look at something called IntelliJ, which is an IDE for a few different languages, but like if you're building Java projects or Kotlin projects unrelated to Android, you'll probably use IntelliJ. It's a really popular one. And so, like I said, you get terminal support. So I have terminal down at the bottom if I want to do something like that. You'll get project support. So even more powerful, because for a web-based project, maybe I'm creating my folder structure myself. For an IDE project, so like if I want to go up to file, I can actually create a new project, and it's going to generate a large amount of, or possibly a large amount of different folders and different pieces that I need, kind of doing a lot of the basic work. It does a lot of the basic work so that I don't need to. So it's automatically laid out. The IDE has automatically laid out things like my source folder. It created a basic initial file for me, and also like an output file, for example. Right now, for us, the most powerful feature of an IDE is the fact that we can do some debugging, which just means that we can stop the code while it's running and kind of examine variables and kind of play around more with some of the code. So Over here in what they call the gutter, I have my line numbers, but I can also click on a specific line to say, hey, I want to put a breakpoint here. Now, if I run this in debug mode, we're going to see, okay, so I'm in the debugger. It's kind of giving me some information. We'll talk about some of that, but we don't have much going on here. You can see that it's highlighted green. And so while in debug mode, this highlighted green means this is the next line to execute. So if we look at our console, this is the active running program. It's paused right now. So hello world hasn't printed out to the screen, but I can actually step through my code line by line. So I'm going to click the step over button, and you'll see it now has printed hello world to the screen. The next line to execute is this learn with Kojo line. So I can execute that one more time, and you can see it actually did print that out to the screen. There's not really anything else in this program, so I can just continue to exit, and you can say process finished. So that's just a really, really simple example of debugging, but that's all built in. You get that out of the box with an IDE. Over here, I have a really basic iOS project. I mean, this is like just the initial project. I've laid out a button. So besides just the code views, a lot of times for example, for mobile projects, you'll get a lot of tools related to laying out different pieces. So if I want to make a screen, I can actually, here's the basic screen that I have. I can actually take something like a button and more easily lay it out. Here I can make the button, make sure that it's centered on screen. I can add constraints to it, meaning that no matter what size the screen is, it's always going to be centered in screen. There's a bunch of information about the insets. There's the height and width of the button, pieces like that. Let's see. Additionally, of course, we can view the source code, but there's just nothing really here in this. Let's see. Is there anything else? For right now, there's nothing else. We do get that simulator. Did I have that simulator running? I thought I did. Okay. Yeah. So I'm booting up this. It's building right now, so it's booting up the simulator. So this is just built in. Looks like it's running iPhone X 12.4. It's going to run that program, even though the program doesn't really do anything at all. Let's just let it boot up here. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, it just had to boot up completely. Yeah, so it has that button. It looks like it's running an earlier version of this program. So there's like a switch that I had put on earlier. You can't see it right now. You can't do any clicks right now. But so this would be that active running program that I have. So you can actually do all of your testing on here, or at least most of your testing. You can do it right here on the simulator, which is really powerful. So integrated development environment. There is Android Studio. Here's just a really simple example of Xcode, but we already kind of saw that. Yeah, so like I said, we're going to be using the term IDE a whole lot. We're going to be using IDEs themselves, either IntelliJ, Android Studio, or Xcode, a lot in the main, in some of the main courses. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of the differences between these things. If you have any questions, just let us know. See you in the next video.